Nights like these used to feel normal. Routine. But something about this one sent a chill through me the moment the front door swung open. Emily stepped inside, her breathing labored, cheeks flushed as if she had been running hard. Her damp hair clung to the sides of her face, stray strands sticking to her neck. She toed off her sneakers carelessly, sending them skidding across the floor, and peeled off her hoodie, tossing it onto the nearest chair. The thin tank top underneath clung to her body, damp with sweat, or something else. "Good run?" I asked, keeping my voice light. "Yeah," she replied too quickly, grabbing a bottle of water from the counter without looking at me. "Just needed to clear my head." It was subtle, but I caught it. The way she turned slightly away, the way her fingers trembled just a little as she twisted the cap off the bottle. Then, something else hit me. A scent. Faint but unmistakable. Not just the usual salty tang of sweat, but something deeper. A hint of alcohol. That didn't make sense. Emily was a creature of habit. Disciplined. She never drank before a run. I opened my mouth to say something, but before I could, she was already heading down the hallway. "I'm jumping in the shower," she called over her shoulder, disappearing into the bathroom without waiting for a reply. I watched her go, my mind racing. There was something I couldn't quite grasp yet, but it gnawed at me. And then I saw it. A dark, wet patch on the back of her sweatpants. My stomach tightened. It wasn't big, but it was there, unmistakable. My first thought was sweat. Maybe she had just pushed herself too hard. But the shape of it, the location, no, it didn't sit right. I told myself not to overthink it, not to jump to conclusions. But even as I stood there, frozen in place, my gut was already telling me something I didn't want to hear. The bathroom door swung shut, but it didn't latch all the way. I wasn't trying to spy on her, but I didn't move away either. The sound of the shower roared to life, steam curling from the narrow gap in the doorway. I should have just walked off. Should have let it go. But I didn't. Through the sliver of the open door, I saw her toss her tank top to the side. A moment later, she shimmied out of her sweatpants, peeling them down her legs. My breath caught. She wasn't wearing anything underneath. My pulse pounded in my ears. Emily wasn't the type to forget something like that. She was meticulous, borderline obsessive about little things. Always double-checking her outfits, always making sure everything was in place. But this wasn't a mistake. I stepped back, swallowing hard, a sick feeling creeping into my chest. The smell of alcohol, the wet stain, the missing underwear, it wasn't just paranoia. The puzzle pieces were coming together, but the image they formed was one I didn't want to see. I stood there, gripping the edge of the counter, my mind at war with itself. Do I confront her? Pretend I didn't notice? Act like nothing is wrong and see if she confesses? Whatever was happening here, it was bigger than just a late-night run. And deep down, I knew, this was just the beginning. I stood there, staring at the bathroom door, my pulse slow but heavy. The rush of the shower filled the silence of the house, steam curling through the thin gap in the doorway. Every instinct told me to walk away, to pretend I hadn't seen what I'd seen, to ignore the smell of alcohol, the missing underwear, the wet stain that didn't add up. But I couldn't. Something inside me had shifted, a quiet but undeniable certainty that whatever was happening, whatever she was hiding, it wasn't innocent. I took a step forward, drawn by an impulse I didn't fully understand. The pile of discarded clothes lay near the sink, crumpled like she hadn't even thought about them. And peeking out from the pocket of her sweatpants was her phone. I hesitated. Emily wasn't reckless. She was calculated, careful. If she had left her phone there, it wasn't because she'd forgotten. It was because she thought she had nothing to hide. Or maybe, just maybe, because she was too comfortable in her lies to think she'd ever get caught. The sound of running water masked my movements as I reached down and slid the phone from her pocket. My fingers wrapped around it with unsettling ease, as if some part of me had already decided this was inevitable. I stepped back into the living room, sank onto the couch, and turned on the screen. The notifications flooded in, missed calls, social media alerts. But one message stood out, cutting through the noise like a blade to the ribs. I can still feel your hands on me. When can I see you again? Jason. I exhaled slowly, controlled. My body didn't react the way I thought it would. No racing heartbeat, no trembling hands. Just a quiet, growing rage curling through me like smoke. I swiped up, entered the passcode she had never bothered to change, and went straight to her messages. Jason's name sat at the very top, waiting. I tapped. The thread unraveled in front of me, a digital confession typed out in real time. You were incredible, he had written just hours ago. You have no idea what you do to me, Emily had responded. I scrolled, my breath steady but my thoughts unraveling. The messages stretched back for weeks, maybe months. A slow progression of flirtation, then confessions, then something deeper. Plans made in hushed tones. A weekend getaway under the excuse of self-care. A hotel I recognized. A bar she had once mentioned was her usual after-run spot. And then, the photos. Nothing explicit, but enough. A shot of Jason, smirking like he knew exactly what he was doing. Another of their hands entwined across a candlelit table. A blurry mirror selfie of her in a hotel room I had never seen before. It wasn't just an affair. It was a relationship. A whole other life she had built beneath the surface of ours. I kept scrolling, my thumb moving like it was detached from my body, until I reached the most recent exchange. I can't wait to hold you again, Jason had typed. Soon, Emily had replied. I'll find a way. I always do for you. I stared at the words, letting their weight sink in. She didn't just betray me. She chose him. Over and over again. I set the phone down, my mind eerily calm, though my chest felt like it had been hollowed out. From the bathroom, the water shut off. For the first time since this all started, my hands felt cold. Emily moved around behind the door, the sound of a towel being pulled from the rack, the shuffle of feet on tile. In a moment, she would step out, skin flushed from the heat, eyes clear and unsuspecting. She'd walk past me, maybe kiss my cheek, maybe tell me she was tired and head straight to bed. She'd have no idea I knew. And the most terrifying thing, I wasn't sure whether I wanted to confront her or play along. Because now, this wasn't just about her betrayal. It was about how I was going to make her pay. I was sitting at the kitchen table, her phone still in my grip, when she finally stepped out of the bathroom. Her damp hair clung to her shoulders, a faint cloud of steam trailing behind her. She was dressed in an oversized t-shirt, one of mine, ironically, and a fresh pair of shorts. For a split second, she seemed caught off guard to find me there, but then her eyes flicked toward the table, searching. She knew. Have you seen my phone? She asked, her voice casual, too casual. I didn't answer right away. Instead, I turned the screen toward her, the bright glow of damning words still fresh on the display. Jason's message stared back at her like a neon sign in the dark. I can still feel your hands on me. When can I see you again? Emily's face barely moved, but I caught the shift, the micro-expression of surprise, quickly masked by something else. Annoyance. Not guilt. Not fear. Annoyance. She walked over slowly, pulling out the chair across from me, and sat down with a deliberate ease. One leg crossed over the other, her posture loose, almost lazy. But I could see it now, the cracks in her performance. The slight twitch in her jaw. The way her fingers tapped against her thigh. She was calculating. Deciding how to play this. So, she finally said, tilting her head. What do you want me to say? The sheer audacity of the question made my grip on the phone tighten. I'd expected denial, maybe some flimsy excuse. But this was something worse. This was someone who had already accepted their betrayal and decided it wasn't worth hiding anymore. Try saying something honest, I said, my voice sharper than I intended. She exhaled through her nose, a humorless laugh escaping her lips. Honest. You've already gone through my phone. What's left to say? I leaned forward, resting my elbows on the table. I want to hear it from you. She studied me, her gaze unwavering. For the first time, I saw it clearly. She wasn't panicking because, in her mind, she had already won. She had already chosen. Fine, she said with a small shrug, her lips curling at the corners. Yes, I've been seeing someone. But you already knew that, so let's not pretend this is about discovery. The casual cruelty in her words sent a cold pulse through my veins. Why? I asked, forcing the word out before my anger could spill over. Another shrug. Why not? You've been so distant. Always working, always serious. I wanted something different. Something different. That was her excuse. Not unhappiness. Not loneliness. Not some deep aching need that I had failed to fill. Just boredom. And lying to me? Sneaking around. I pushed. She sighed, as if the conversation exhausted her. I didn't mean for it to get this far. But it did, I shot back. And not once did you stop. Not once did you think maybe you should talk to me. You chose this. She hesitated for the first time, her fingers tightening around the fabric of her shorts. But her arrogance, the thing that had kept her so composed, was still there, simmering beneath the surface. You wouldn't understand, she muttered. My blood went hot. You don't get to make this about me, I said, my voice cold now. I was here. I asked if something was wrong. I gave you every chance to be honest, and you lied to my face every single time. She opened her mouth, but whatever she had planned to say, she thought better of it. For the first time, real silence filled the space between us. I took a slow breath and leaned back. I want you to leave. Her head snapped up, her confidence cracking. What? You heard me, I said, standing. Pack your things and go. She blinked. You're seriously kicking me out? I nodded. Stay with Jason. Stay with a friend. I don't care. But you're not staying here. For the first time, the arrogance drained from her face. She looked smaller. She glanced around the kitchen, as if suddenly realizing that this place, this life, was slipping out of her hands. You don't mean that, she said, but there was no certainty left in her voice. I do, I said, meeting her gaze with unwavering resolve. And you're leaving tonight. She stared at me, waiting for me to break, waiting for me to take it back. But I didn't. Her fingers dug into her lap. Then, without another word, she stood up and walked down the hall toward the bedroom. I listened to the sound of drawers opening, of fabric rustling. The mechanical movements of someone whose world had just collapsed. I should have felt relief. Victory. Something. Instead, I just felt empty. Then, after a long, heavy silence, her voice cut through the air, low and unreadable. You're making a mistake. I turned toward the hallway, and there she stood, a bag in her hand, her eyes locked on me. Not regretful. Not sad. Just watching. Calculating. And for the first time since this all started, I felt something worse than betrayal. I felt uneasy. Like maybe this wasn't over. Like maybe she still had one last move left to make. I just didn't know what it was yet. The door shut behind her, leaving behind a heavy, suffocating silence. I stood there, frozen, waiting for something. Relief, maybe. Closure. But it never came. Instead, a strange, unsettling feeling settled in my chest. Like I had done the right thing but hadn't fully grasped the cost yet. Her words still echoed in my mind. You're going to regret this. I stepped toward the window and looked outside. Emily was already in her car, but she wasn't leaving. The engine was running, the red glow of the taillights reflected on the wet pavement, but she just sat there. She wasn't reaching for her bag. She wasn't looking at her phone. She wasn't adjusting anything. She was just sitting there. I couldn't see her face clearly through the windshield, but the way she remained motionless made my stomach tighten. This wasn't hesitation. It wasn't like she was debating whether or not to come back. No. She looked like someone who was thinking about something else entirely. After several long, unbearable seconds, her headlights flashed on, and she slowly pulled out of the driveway. Not in a rush. Not in a panic. With purpose. And then, just like that, she was gone. I forced myself to turn away from the window. She's gone. That's all that matters. I walked back to the kitchen, grabbed a glass of water out of habit, but never took a sip. Instead, I just held it, my mind still spinning through everything that had happened tonight. Anger. Not at her. At myself. For being so blind. For trusting her, believing every lie, ignoring every red flag. Flashes of the evening replayed in my mind. How she walked into the house, pretending everything was normal. How she sat across from me, arrogant, indifferent, fully convinced that she was in control. Like I was the problem, not her. I took a slow, deep breath, trying to steady myself. But after the anger came the emptiness. This place wasn't ours anymore. It wasn't even mine. It was just a reminder of what we used to be. I got up and walked toward the bedroom, stopping in the doorway. The bed was made. Her things were still on the nightstand. Her book, her perfume, the ring she never wore but always kept close. I realized then that I'd have to be the one to pack it all up. Because she wasn't coming back for it. I moved to the dresser, pulled open the top drawer. Her clothes. Perfectly folded. I ran my fingers over the fabric of the t-shirt she used to wear around the house. Then I slammed the drawer shut. Enough. I said it was over. So it's over. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at nothing. The house was silent. So silent that it made my skin crawl. I thought about turning on music, the TV, something, anything, to fill the void. But I didn't. I just sat there. A minute passed. Then another. Then an hour. Realizing that the life I had before this moment was gone. And that now, I had to figure out how to start over. By the time the afternoon sun stretched through the windows, the house had settled into an unfamiliar silence. It wasn't the kind of silence that weighed down the air, thick with tension and unspoken words. It was different now. Lighter. I stood in the kitchen, hands resting on the back of a chair, the same chair where she had sat just hours ago, trying to salvage something already beyond repair. Her voice still echoed in my head, her apologies hollow, her promises coming too late to matter. I never wanted to hurt you. It didn't mean anything. Please, we can fix this. But trust wasn't something that could be stitched back together with empty words. She had made choices. Repeatedly. Deliberately. And I had made mine. I told her to leave. I watched as she packed her things, her posture rigid with defiance, her face carefully blank, though I could see the cracks in her composure. She had walked out, closing the door behind her, and I hadn't stopped her. I wouldn't stop her. For the first time in a long time, my mind was clear. No doubts. No second guessing. I pulled out my phone, opened my contacts, and scrolled until I found her name. For a moment, I just stared at it, at the tiny picture beside her name, one of those old happy photos that no longer felt real. Then, without hesitation, I deleted it. And I didn't stop there. Social media. Shared accounts. Cloud storage with years of photos. One by one, I erased her from every space she didn't deserve to occupy anymore. This wasn't about anger. It wasn't about revenge. It was about taking my life back. Then, I made another decision. I called my lawyer. I want to start the divorce process immediately. The words came out steady, firm. There was no sadness, no hesitation. Just resolve. The rest of the day passed in a strange, weightless blur. I moved through the house, picking up the last remnants of her presence. A scarf on the coat rack. A half-empty perfume bottle in the bathroom. A pair of sneakers she had left by the door. It all went into a box. With each item I removed, The house felt less like a battlefield and more like a refuge. I wasn't just throwing things away. I was making space for something new. That evening, I sat on the couch, staring at the empty space across from me. The silence was still overwhelming, but it didn't feel like a burden anymore. It felt like clarity. I thought about all the times I had doubted myself, all the moments I had pushed away suspicion, convincing myself that I was just being paranoid. The missed calls, the late nights, the excuses that never quite added up. And I thought about how easy it had been for her to throw it all away. People say love is enough. That if you love someone, you fight for them, forgive them, hold on no matter what. But that's a lie. Love isn't enough when trust is gone. In the following days, I started rebuilding. I reached out to friends I had lost touch with, the ones I had unintentionally pushed aside while trying to hold together something that had already been falling apart. Their support was unwavering. They didn't pity me, didn't offer meaningless cliches about healing and time. They just showed up. I picked up old hobbies, the ones I had forgotten in the haze of trying to be a good partner to someone who had already checked out. I started going to the gym again, not for distraction, but because it reminded me of who I was before everything had unraveled. I took back my life, one step at a time. But the nights were the hardest. Lying in bed, in the quiet darkness, my mind had a way of wandering back to the lies I had wanted to believe. To the realization that, even though she was gone, the weight of betrayal didn't disappear overnight. But each morning, it got a little lighter. I moved the furniture around, changed things in the house to reflect me, not us. I took down the framed photos, boxed them up, and tucked them away in the back of the closet. Not out of bitterness, but because I no longer needed them in front of me. I was no longer living in the past. Weeks passed. And with every passing day, I realized something. Her betrayal wasn't the end of my life. It was just the end of a chapter, one that had needed to close so I could start a new one. Some people would call it a tragedy. But to me, it was freedom. I had spent so much time trying to make sense of why she did what she did. But in the end, it didn't matter. Her choices were hers. And my choice was to move forward. Today, I stand on the other side of heartbreak. Not unscathed, but stronger. The pain lingers, but so does hope. This isn't the end of my story. It's just the beginning of a new one.